Navigating a shared apartment requires memorizing every late-night sound, creaking floorboards, a refrigerator's rattling hum. It also means fiercely guarding invisible boundaries, especially with a straight best friend. Until 2 a.m. arrives. Dead silence fills every room. Suddenly, a mattress dips heavily under unexpected weight. Paralysis sets in. Rationalizations follow. Maybe a nightmare, perhaps sleepwalking. But soon, a heavy arm slides across an unmoving waist. Hot breath hits bare skin, carrying a whispered confession guaranteed to shatter reality completely. I always knew the statistics. I'm a cynical guy by nature, the kind of person who reads the terms and conditions before clicking accept. So, when I signed a lease with Seth, I knew exactly what I was walking into. The narrative is as old as time, and usually ends in a spectacularly messy eviction. The gay guy moves in with the straight guy, falls hopelessly in love with the casual, careless intimacy that straight guys hand out like spare change, and eventually ruins the friendship by mistaking a drunken lean for true love. I was determined not to be a cliché. I built my emotional walls so high you would have needed a municipal permit to scale them. Our apartment was a cramped, overpriced two-bedroom walk-up in the city. The hot water was a suggestion. The radiator sounded like a dying engine. And the rent was just cheap enough to keep us trapped there. We fit together in that space like mismatched gears that somehow turned the machine. I was all rigid lines, color-coded calendars, and quiet evenings. Seth was chaos. He was the kind of guy who left half-empty coffee mugs on the fire escape, who owned precisely 2 nice shirts, but somehow always looked like he'd just stepped out of a catalog, and who took up entirely too much oxygen in any room he walked into. He worked as an architectural draftsman, spending hours hunched over blueprints with graphite smudged across his jaw. And he was straight, aggressively, uncomplicatedly straight. For the first 2 years, the routine was grueling but manageable. I listened to the muffled giggles of various women, baristas, mutual friends, women he met on apps, through the painfully thin drywall. I made polite conversation with them in the kitchen the morning after, pouring them coffee while Seth dug around for his keys, completely oblivious to the sour taste in my mouth. I categorized the ache in my chest as a mild, chronic condition, something you just learn to live with, like a bad knee. The real torture wasn't the women anyway. It was the way Seth treated me. Straight men who are comfortable in their masculinity possess a specific brand of casual physical affection that is absolutely devastating. Seth had zero concept of personal space. If we were sitting on our battered thrift store couch watching a movie, his knee would be pressed flush against mine. If he laughed at a joke, his heavy hand would land on my thigh, leaving a ghost of warmth long after he pulled away. If I was cooking, he'd squeeze past me to get to the fridge, his broad chest brushing against my back, leaving me staring blindly at the chopping board, gripping the kitchen knife until my knuckles turned white. He didn't mean anything by it. That was the brutal reality I repeated to myself every single day. It was just how he existed in the world, tactile, warm, entirely unbothered. To him, I was his best friend, a fixture, safe. I maintained the boundary fiercely. Whenever he got too close, I deployed a sarcastic comment to push him back. If he slung an arm around my shoulders on the walk back from the bar, I'd duck out from under it to point out a stray cat or check my phone. I kept my voice flat, my reactions neutral. I became a master at starving myself of the very thing I wanted most, simply because I knew a few breadcrumbs would only make me hungrier. "You're awfully quiet tonight," he said, one evening in late October. We were on the fire escape. The air was biting, smelling of exhaust and impending rain. I took a slow drag from my cigarette, not looking at him. Just thinking about work. Bullshit. He bumped his shoulder against mine. The contact sent a sharp, familiar jolt straight up my spine. You only smoke when you're stressed. What's going on in that giant overthinking brain of yours? I looked at him then. His hair was a mess, falling into eyes that were catching the amber light of the street lamp below. He looked so genuinely concerned, so effortlessly perfect, that it made me furious. I'm fine, Seth. Just drop it, I snapped, harsher than I intended. He blinked, clearly taken aback. The easy smile fell off his face. For a second, I thought he was going to argue, maybe push closer. Instead, he pulled back, the physical distance suddenly feeling colder than the autumn air. All right, he muttered, turning his gaze to the street. Message received. I stayed out there long after he went back inside, smoking until my fingers were numb, hating myself for pushing him away, and hating him for making it necessary. Things changed in November. I can pinpoint the exact week the atmosphere in the apartment shifted from casual cohabitation to something tight, suffocating, and heavy. It started with a breakup. Seth had been seeing a girl named Rachel for a few months. She was smart, funny, and didn't leave her wet towels on the bathroom floor. I actually liked her, which made the whole situation exponentially worse. Then on a Tuesday, Seth came home early, dropped his keys on the counter with a metallic clatter, and announced it was over. What happened? I asked, looking up from my laptop. He shrugged off his jacket, running a hand through his hair. I don't know. Just wasn't right. Something was missing. He didn't elaborate, and I didn't push. But after that day, the girls stopped coming over. Seth stopped going out on weekends. The quiet evenings I used to spend alone were suddenly populated by him. He was just there, all the time, occupying my space, breathing my air, and he started looking at me differently. It wasn't his usual fleeting eye contact. It was a heavy, lingering gaze that I'd catch out of the corner of my eye. I'd be washing dishes, turn my head, and find him sitting at the kitchen island, a beer in his hand, his eyes fixed on me with a strange, unreadable intensity. Whenever I caught him, he didn't look away immediately. He just held the stare for a beat too long before taking a slow sip of his drink. I told myself I was losing my mind. I was projecting. I was so touch-starved and pathetic that I was hallucinating reciprocal interest from a man who had spent the last 2 years explicitly demonstrating otherwise. But the physical dynamic changed, too. The casual, sprawling touches vanished. Instead, there was a hyper-awareness, a magnetic tension that made the air between us crackle. If we reached for the same cabinet and our fingers brushed, he wouldn't just pull back. He would freeze, his breath hitching just slightly before slowly withdrawing his hand. It was agonizing. I was walking on a tightrope, completely blindfolded, waiting for the inevitable fall. The breaking point arrived on a Friday night in early December. It was sleeting outside, a miserable, freezing rain that rattled the window panes. We had ordered terrible Chinese takeout and were eating it straight from the cardboard boxes on the living room floor, a documentary playing on mute in the background. The silence between us had stretched on for 20 minutes, thick and vibrating. I was desperately trying to focus on my noodles, avoiding his gaze. Why don't you ever bring guys home? The question hit the quiet room like a physical blow. I stopped chewing. I carefully placed my chopsticks down on the coffee table. buying myself a few seconds to regulate my heart rate. "Excuse me?" I kept my voice aggressively level. Seth wasn't eating. He was leaning against the base of the couch, watching me. "You heard me. 2 years, Noah. I've brought half of the city back here, and you've never brought anyone. You don't talk about dating. You don't go on apps. You just work and come home and sit here with me." "Are you complaining about my company?" I deflected, raising an eyebrow. "You know I'm not." He shifted, leaning slightly forward. The space between us suddenly felt microscopic. "I just want to know why." "It's none of your business," I said sharply. "I like my privacy. I don't have the energy to explain myself to strangers or play the games required to get someone into my bed. So you just stay lonely?" His voice dropped, losing its confrontational edge, becoming something softer, something dangerous. "I'm not lonely," I lied through my teeth. "Bullshit," he whispered. He moved then. It was a subtle shift in weight, but suddenly he was closer, his knee inches from mine. I could smell the faint scent of his soap, the salt of the takeout, the electric smell of the winter storm outside. His eyes were locked on my face, tracing the line of my jaw, dropping to my mouth, and staying there. Every alarm bell in my head was screaming, "Get up, make a joke, walk away. Do not let this happen." "Seth," I warned, my voice betraying me by shaking slightly. "What?" he breathed. He wasn't stopping. He leaned in another inch. I could feel the heat radiating off him. My chest felt like it was caving in. He's going to ruin us, I thought. He's bored. He's curious. He's lonely. And he's going to use me to figure himself out. And when he realizes he's made a mistake, I'll be the one left bleeding. I shoved myself backward, scrambling to my feet so fast I knocked my carton of rice onto the rug. "Stop!" I ordered, my voice cracking like a whip in the quiet room. Seth flinched, snapping backward as if I had hit him. He looked up at me, his eyes wide, a flash of genuine hurt crossing his features before the mask slammed down. "I'm going to bed," I managed to say, turning on my heel. "Noah, wait!" I didn't wait. I walked into my room, shut the door, and locked it. I stood in the dark, my forehead pressed against the cool wood of the door, listening to the silence of the apartment. I heard him clean up the spilled rice. I heard the water run in the sink. I heard his heavy footsteps pause outside my door for a long, agonizing minute. I held my breath, praying he wouldn't knock, terrified that he would. He didn't. His footsteps faded down the hall to his own room. I spent the rest of the night staring at the ceiling, feeling like I had just survived a car crash, completely unaware that the real impact was still coming. I kept my bedroom door locked for a week. We fell into a strained, brutal choreography. We avoided each other with surgical precision. If he was in the kitchen, I stayed in my room. If I was in the living room, he stayed out late. The apartment felt like a pressure cooker, the air so dense with unspoken words that it was hard to draw a full breath. I was exhausted. I was running on 4 hours of sleep a night, my mind playing that moment on the floor on a continuous torturous loop. By the second week of December, the exhaustion won. It was a Tuesday, the temperature had plummeted, and the building's ancient heating system had given up completely. I was freezing, utterly drained, and just wanted to sleep. I brushed my teeth, walked into my room, and, for the first time in 10 days, I was too tired to turn the deadbolt on my door. I just shut it, crawled under my heavy duvet, and closed my eyes. The insomnia, of course, was waiting for me. At 2 a.m., I was wide awake. The city outside was dead quiet, muffled by a thick layer of snow that had started falling hours ago. The only sounds were the occasional metallic clank of the useless radiator and the low howl of the wind in the alleyway. Then I heard it. The floorboards in the hallway creaked. I froze, my eyes snapping open in the dark. I knew the weight of those footsteps. It was Seth. He was pacing. The creaking moved from his bedroom door, down the short hallway, stopped, and then retreated. He did this 3 times, pacing, hesitating. My heart started a slow, heavy thud against my ribs. "Go back to bed," I pleaded silently. "Please, just go back to bed." The pacing stopped. I heard the faint metallic click of my doorknob turning. Panic, cold and sharp, flooded my veins. I immediately snapped my eyes shut, rolled onto my side facing the wall, and forced my breathing into the slow, rhythmic cadence of deep sleep. The door opened. The hinges let out a faint, whining protest. He didn't turn on the light. I could feel his presence in the doorway, a solid mass displacing the cold air in the room. He stood there for what felt like an eternity. I focused entirely on my chest, willing it to rise and fall evenly, praying the darkness would hide the violent trembling that was starting in my hands. "He's just checking on me," I rationalized blindly. "He thinks I'm mad at him. He's making sure I'm okay." Footsteps, slow, deliberate, crossing the small expanse of the floor. He stopped right beside my bed. I squeezed my eyes shut so tight it hurt. I was suspended in terror and adrenaline. The air was thick. I could hear his breathing now, slightly shallow, slightly ragged. Then the mattress dipped behind me. My brain short-circuited. The sheer physical weight of him pulled the mattress down, angling my body slightly backward toward his. I didn't move. I couldn't. I was paralyzed by a fear so profound, it bordered on instinctual. He climbed under the covers. The cold air rushed in as he lifted the duvet, followed instantly by the radiating furnace-like heat of his body. He was wearing a t-shirt and sweatpants. I could feel the rough cotton brush against my back as he settled onto the mattress. "Say something," my brain screamed. "Sit up, yell at him, ask him what the hell he's doing." But my voice was locked in my throat. If I moved, if I acknowledged this was happening, it became real. And if it was real, I had no idea how to survive it. For 2 full minutes, we lay there in the dark. He was about 6 inches behind me. I could feel the heat of him seeping through my shirt. I was rigid, my fingers digging into the edge of the pillow. Then he closed the gap. He slid across the sheets, his chest pressed flush against my back, solid and overwhelmingly warm. My breath caught audibly in my throat, ruining the illusion of sleep. But he didn't stop. A heavy arm reached over my waist, the weight of it settling over my ribs, anchoring me down. His hand was large, his fingers spreading out against my stomach. I was suffocating. The intimacy of it was crushing. It was exactly what I had spent 2 years agonizingly dreaming about, happening in the dark, without a single word spoken. He shifted slightly, lowering his head until his face was pressed into the space between my shoulder blades. I could feel the soft drag of his hair against my neck. I felt the deep, shuddering breath he took, his chest expanding against my spine. I opened my eyes, staring blindly at the dark wall. I had to end this. I had to turn around and kick him out before my resolve completely shattered. I took a breath, preparing to speak, to ruin it. Before I could make a sound, his grip tightened marginally around my waist. He shifted his face closer to my neck, His voice was a gravelly, broken whisper in the dead of the night, slicing straight through the dark and straight through my chest. "I know you're awake," Seth whispered, his breath hot against my skin. "Don't tell me to leave. Please, just tell me I'm not the only one losing my mind over this." The world stopped spinning. The cynicism, the walls, the careful armor I had built over 2 years. It all fractured in a single second. My hands released their death grip on the pillow. The silence rushed back into the room, ringing in my ears as I slowly turned my head to look at him. I turned slowly. The movement felt monumental, like dragging heavy stones across the floorboards. The friction of the cotton sheets rustled loudly in the suffocating quiet of the room. As I shifted onto my other side, Seth's arm remained draped over my waist. He didn't pull back to give me space. He merely adjusted his angle, letting his hand slide up to rest flat against my ribs. I was facing him now. The room was bathed in the weak, grayish ambient light, bleeding through the window blinds from the snow-covered street outside. It was just enough to make out the sharp lines of his face. His jaw was tense. His eyes were wide open, searching mine with a frantic, unshielded desperation I had never seen in him before. "What are you doing?" My voice was barely a rasp. It sounded foreign to my own ears, scraped raw by the adrenaline pounding in my throat. Seth swallowed hard. I watched the movement of his throat, mesmerized and terrified in equal measure. "I told you I couldn't stay in my room." "That's not an answer." I tried to inject my usual biting sarcasm into the words, trying to summon the fortress of cynicism that had kept me safe for 2 years. It failed completely. My voice just sounded fragile. "You don't sleep in my bed, Seth. You don't climb in here at 2 in the morning and pull me against you. You're straight." He flinched at the word. I know what I've said. I know how I've lived." He shifted closer, closing the final inch between us, our knees tangled beneath the heavy duvet. "But I also know that for the last 6 months, every time I took a girl out, I spent the entire night wondering what you were doing back here. I know that when I broke up with Rachel, I didn't feel a damn thing except relief that I didn't have to leave the apartment on weekends anymore." I stared at him, my brain struggling to process the data. I pushed my hands against his chest, intending to shove him backward, to put distance between the heat of his body and the crumbling ice in my chest. He didn't budge. Instead, he reached up, catching one of my wrists. He didn't force it away. He just held it gently, his thumb pressing against my pulse point, which was hammering a frantic rhythm against his skin. "You're confused," I whispered, shaking my head. "You're bored, or you're lonely, and I'm here. I'm convenient." "Don't do that," he said, his voice dropping an octave, tightening with a sudden edge of anger. "Don't insult me, and don't insult yourself. You are the least convenient person I know, Noah. You're stubborn. You're closed off. You snap at me every time I get within 3 feet of you. Because you were torturing me." The words tore out of my mouth before I could stop them. They hung in the freezing air between us, a raw, bleeding confession that I could never take back. I squeezed my eyes shut, mortified by my own lack of discipline, waiting for the pity to wash over his face. I waited for him to slowly let go of my wrist, to mumble an apology, to carefully backpedal out of my bed and out of my life. Instead, a profound silence stretched between us. I felt a shift in the mattress. Then I felt his hand cup my jaw. His palm was rough, calloused from hours of drafting and gripping pencils, but the touch was devastatingly gentle. His thumb swept across my cheekbone, mapping the contours of my face in the dark. I opened my eyes. He was looking at me not with pity, but with a profound, shattering sorrow. "I didn't know," he whispered. "I swear to God, Noah, I didn't know I was hurting you. I just knew I wanted to be near you." I kept testing the boundary, trying to figure out why I felt like a magnet being pulled across the room every time you walked in. "I thought you just hated being touched. I thought I was making you uncomfortable." "You were," I admitted, my voice cracking, "because I knew I could never have it. Not really." Seth moved his thumb down to my lower lip, letting it rest there. The physical contact sent a jolt of pure electricity straight to my core. "The night we had takeout," he murmured, his eyes dropping to my mouth. "When I asked you why you never brought guys home. Do you know why I asked?" I shook my head slightly, afraid to break the contact. "Because the thought of you bringing a man into this apartment made me want to put my fist through the drywall." Seth let out a shaky, self-deprecating laugh. "I was sitting on the floor, looking at you, and I realized that if you smiled at some random guy the way you sometimes smile at me when you think I'm not looking, I would lose my mind. I didn't want to just be your roommate. I didn't want to just be your friend." "Seth, I'm terrified, Noah." The admission stripped away whatever was left of the confident, chaotic, straight guy I thought I knew. He looked incredibly young in the pale light. Vulnerable. "I don't know the rules. I don't know what I'm doing. But I know that when you walked away from me that night and locked your door, it felt like the floor dropped out from under me. I spent the last week feeling like I was suffocating. I can't do it anymore. I need you to look at me." I was looking at him. I couldn't look anywhere else. The heavy armor I had worn for 2 years was lying in pieces on the bedroom floor. "I'm not a laboratory," I warned him, trying to hold on to one last shred of self-preservation. "I will not be the guy you experiment with and then discard when you realize the reality is too messy. I survive you as a roommate. I will not survive you as a mistake. You're not an experiment." Seth's gaze locked onto mine, fierce and uncompromising. "You're the only sure thing in my life." He leaned in. I stopped breathing. The agonizingly slow trajectory of his face moving toward mine felt like a collision in slow motion. I closed my eyes, my hands moving instinctively to grip the front of his t-shirt. When his lips finally brushed against mine, it wasn't a tentative, questioning touch. It was deliberate. It was a claiming. The first contact sent a shockwave through my nervous system. His mouth was warm, tasting faintly of mint and the biting cold air of the hallway. I let out a jagged exhale, opening my mouth slightly, and that was all the invitation he needed. The hesitation vanished. He slid his hand to the back of my neck, his fingers twisting into my hair, pulling me flush against him. The kiss deepened, turning desperate and starved. 2 years of repressed energy, of careful avoidance, of accidental brushings in the kitchen and stifled longing, ignited all at once. I kissed him back with a ferocity that surprised me, my hands pulling at his shoulders, trying to drag him closer, even though there was absolutely no space left between us. He groaned softly into my mouth, a low, vibrating sound that went straight to my head. He rolled onto his back, pulling me with him until I was half sprawled across his chest. I felt his heart hammering against my ribs, matching the frantic, terrified, exhilarating rhythm of my own. We stayed like that for hours. The talking stopped. The words had been exhausted. We communicated in the slide of hands over skin, in the soft, sharp intakes of breath in the cold room, in the desperate, clutching need to assure ourselves that the other person was real and was staying. When exhaustion finally dragged me under, the snow was still falling outside. I fell asleep with my face pressed into the crook of his neck, his heavy arm locked securely around my waist, keeping me exactly where I was supposed to be. The radiator woke me up. It let out a sudden, violent hiss of steam, accompanied by a metallic clanking that echoed through the small bedroom. I jolted awake, my eyes snapping open to a room flooded with the harsh, blinding white light of a winter morning, reflecting off the fresh snow outside. Panic hit me instantly. It wasn't a slow build. It was an immediate, freezing wave that washed over my brain before I had fully registered my surroundings. The room was bright. The night was over. I was lying on my side. I felt a heavy, dead weight draped over my hip. Seth. The memories of the night before crashed into me. The whispered confession. The desperate kissing. The profound, terrifying vulnerability of letting him completely dismantle my defenses. In the dark, it had felt inevitable. It had felt like destiny. In the glaring light of an overcast Wednesday morning, it felt like a monumental, catastrophic mistake. He's going to regret it, my cynical brain supplied instantly. He woke up, the adrenaline wore off, and now he's trapped in a bed with his gay roommate, wondering how the hell he's going to walk back a midnight identity crisis. I needed to move. I needed to get out of the bed, put on real clothes, and pretend I was making coffee. I needed to give him an out, a space to awkwardly laugh it off and pack his bags. I carefully, agonizingly slowly, reached down to lift his arm off my hip. His arm flexed. Before I could shift my weight, his grip tightened, acting like a vice, and he yanked me backward. I slammed solidly against his chest with a soft gasp. "Don't," a voice rumbled directly into my ear. It was thick with sleep, gravelly and deep. I froze. "Seth, let go." "No." He buried his face in the space between my shoulder blades, exhaling a long, warm breath against my t-shirt. "I know exactly what's happening in that overthinking brain of yours. You're mapping out an escape route. You're figuring out how to act like none of this happened to protect my fragile ego." "I have to use the bathroom," I lied, my voice tight. "You can use the bathroom in 5 minutes. He hooked his chin over my shoulder, pressing his cheek against mine. The faint scratch of his morning stubble sent a highly inconvenient shiver down my spine. "Tell me to my face that you regret last night, and I'll let you go." I closed my eyes. "I don't regret it, but you will." Seth sighed, a heavy sound that vibrated against my back. He let go of my waist, but only to shift his weight. He rolled over, grabbing my shoulder and physically turning me until I was flat on my back, looking up at him. He hovered over me, propped up on one elbow. His hair was an absolute disaster, sticking up at odd angles. There were faint dark circles under his eyes from our severe lack of sleep. He looked incredibly rumpled, utterly exhausted, and ridiculously handsome. "Look at me," he commanded softly. I forced myself to meet his eyes. There was no panic in them. There was no regret, no shrinking away from the daylight. They were calm, steady. "I am 28 years old, Noah," he said, his voice quiet, but carrying an immense weight. "I don't sneak into other people's beds because I'm confused. I don't kiss my best friend like my life depends on it as a joke. I told you last night, you are not a mistake. You are the realization." He lowered his head, pressing a firm, deliberate kiss against my mouth. It wasn't rushed. It was grounding, an anchor thrown into the swirling chaos of my anxiety. He pulled back just enough to look at me again. "I am not going anywhere," he promised. "Now, you can go use the bathroom. I'm going to make coffee. And when you come out, I'm going to kiss you again in the kitchen, just to prove the sun didn't reset my brain." He rolled off the bed, leaving a cold void where his body had been. I watched him grab a hoodie off my chair, pull it over his head, and walk out of the room. The door clicked shut behind him. I lay staring at the ceiling for a long time. My heart was pounding, but for the first time in 2 years, it wasn't out of fear. When I finally dragged myself out of bed, splashed cold water on my face, and brushed my teeth, the anxiety was still a low hum in my chest. You don't just erase a fundamental defense mechanism overnight. I braced myself before opening the bedroom door, stepping out into the small hallway. The apartment smelled like cheap coffee and burnt toast. The same as every morning. The floorboards creaked in the exact same spots. The radiator clanged in the corner. The geography of the apartment hadn't changed at all. I walked into the kitchen. Seth was standing by the counter, wearing my oversized gray hoodie, watching the coffee pot violently sputter its last drops. He looked up when I walked in. He didn't tense. He didn't look away awkwardly. He smiled. It was a small, genuine smile that reached his eyes, fundamentally altering the geometry of his face. He picked up a mug, my favorite black one, filled it, and walked over to me. He held it out. I took it, letting the ceramic warmth seep into my cold fingers. True to his word, he didn't say a thing. He stepped into my space, curled a hand around the back of my neck, and kissed me. It tasted like bitter coffee and morning air. It felt like coming home. When he pulled back, he rested his forehead against mine. "So," he whispered, a smirk playing on his lips. "What are the rules now? Do I have to stop leaving my mugs on the fire escape?" "Yes," I breathed, feeling a smile crack through my stoic facade. "And you have to buy your own hoodies." "Absolutely not." He kissed my temple, stepping back to grab his own mug. We leaned against the counters on opposite sides of the narrow kitchen, drinking our coffee in silence. It wasn't the heavy, suffocating silence that had plagued us for the last month. It was comfortable. It was the silence of two people who no longer had anything to hide from each other. The dynamic had fundamentally shifted. The casual, careless intimacy that had once felt like a weapon was gone. In its place was something intentional. He still occupied too much space. He still left his keys wherever they fell. But when he brushed past me to get to the fridge, he didn't just walk away. He let his hand trail across my lower back, a deliberate, lingering touch that said, "I see you. I'm here." I looked around the cramped, overpriced walk-up. The hot water was still going to be a suggestion. The rent was still too high. The walls were still too thin. But as I watched Seth stare out the frosty window, tracing the line of a snowflake on the glass before turning to catch my eye and wink, I realized something fundamental. I had spent 2 years fiercely guarding my territory, mapping out the boundaries, building walls to protect myself from a man I thought could never belong in my world. I thought I knew the exact geography of my apartment. I thought I knew exactly how this story ended. I was wonderfully, spectacularly wrong. The walls were down. The map was being redrawn. And for the first time in my fiercely cynical life, I was genuinely looking forward to exploring the uncharted territory. If you've ever built walls so high just to protect yourself, only to find the exact right person willing to climb them in the dead of night, then you know exactly how Noah feels. The transition from roommates to something entirely real is terrifying, but taking that leap is always worth the risk. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button, share it with someone who needs a reminder that love can show up when you least expect it, and make sure to subscribe to our channel for more deeply human stories. What was your favorite moment between Noah and Seth? Let me know in the comments below.